You know, you can cover just about anything. I was at the Quilt Week in Paducah, and someone covered their car. I kid you not. So you can take something that's very useful, but not that attractive, and turn it into something that's, quite frankly, spectacular. We're going to use the Baby Lock Altair to do some amazing stuff with something that's not very elegant, and it becomes elegant. I'm Cathy. This is Sewing Tech Talk, and we got you covered. So I got these at the very inexpensive store, and these I think are called locker bins, and they're really useful. I've used them all around the house, but it occurred to me, you know, they could be just a little bit nicer, right? So the Baby Lock Altair is pretty amazing because we can create our own embroidery in the Baby Lock Altair, and that's kind of what we need. Why? Well, when you do a cover for a bin, and here's the cover now, this is one of the decorative fills that's in the Baby Lock Altair. The fabric needs to have a little bit of body to it, or your cover for your little box or whatever, it doesn't look as nice. So by doing the stitching with a little bit of stabilizer, leaving that in there, it really gives the fabric body. Now on the inside, you don't have to do the embroidery. You can add a little pocket, which is pretty cool. I used just a lightweight interfacing for that. You could embroider the inside, because sometimes you can see the inside of the box just as easily as you can see the outside. So having said that, now if you use a canvas or a heavier, maybe decor fabric, you might not need that. The fabric just needs to have a little bit of body. Now when you're covering a box or a bin, you have to make your own pattern. And I could give you the pattern for this, but your bin might be slightly different. But it's pretty simple to make one. Basically what I do is I take the bin and I lay it and I trace the sides that I'm going to be creating. And this bin has 4 sides on the outside and 4 sides on the inside. And I take those and I trace them out. Now for the outside, I add just a skosh, maybe a 1/4 inch, maybe an 1/8 of an inch, because it needs to cover the outside edge and it needs to be kind of, you know, snug but not too snug. On the inside, I make it just a little bit smaller. So I make my little pattern and then I know exactly, I make a little trial basically just to make sure that it fits. Then what I do is I need to embroider my fabric so that I have my fabric just for the outside. And it's a pretty simple sewing. But there's one thing that I do that I really wanted to share with you. When I do my bin, I don't cover the bottom because I want this cover to be removable so I can wash it. You know those bins you get, those little pop-up bins, you really can't wash them because they have cardboard in them. But this, super sturdy, and I can take the cover off to wash it. So the bottom on the outside doesn't really have a cover over the top of it, and I just hem the bottom. But the inside has a lining, and the lining on the bottom, well, I need to stitch the corners a special way. And that special way is called a Y seam. That means there are 3 seams coming together, and I can't stitch at a seam allowance. And you'll see that when we get to the machine and we start to stitch. So we're going to do a Y seam today, which is an important seam. You might run into it. Don't be scared. It's going to be okay. But let me talk just briefly about making this pattern, and let's sew some of our lining together before we do our fun embroidery. So we'll put these aside. Now here's my pattern that I drew out for my little bin. I made one for my scraps. Oh, scrap. And on the inside, I didn't do, I just used a regular quilting fabric and I didn't reinforce it too much. So it's a little puffy on the inside. Great look, but this one, it's a little bit flatter. So depending on which way you want to go, either get a sturdier fabric for the inside or do that interfacing on the inside. But here's my pattern. So I did it on just a piece of tissue paper. And this is my lining, so I need 4 of them, fabric with interfacing. Here is my exterior, and it's going to be just a little bit bigger than that bin is, right? The fabric with batting or stabilizer, as you'll see in a bit. And on the bottom of it, I extended it down so that I could have a hem when I finished doing my little cover, right? So that's that. Now, but on the inside, here's the inside for the lining, and I need fabric and interfacing for that. But what I need to do is I need to sew to just the corners and not stitch into this seam allowance right there. So the Baby Lock Altair is really going to help me get a great seam because, you know, it's not precision sewing, but you need to have a pretty accurate seam so it's not so floppy on the inside. But I need to stop at that corner and do a Y seam. So let's see what that looks like on the machine. So we'll put our little bin aside, and I've got started. So here's that inside, the four pieces of that inside. And I put a pocket on one. I thought that would be kind of fun. So on the inside, I hope you can see, and I'm going to fold it up so that you can see, what I need to do is stop sewing right at that seam allowance, which I decided on a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And so on either side, I've stopped at that point, and for the bottom, I also need to stop to that point. So let's sew the final side seam and let me show you what I'm talking about. So here is the final piece I need to put on. You can do some really pretty fabric for the inside. It doesn't take that much to cover this size of a bin, and you can get some really pretty fabric. Maybe a 1/2 yard should do it. So here's my guy. Here's my last little piece I need to add, and I've made a mark where I need to stop sewing. And it's a 1/4 inch, not a 1/4 inch, it's a 1/2 inch in from the side and a 1/2 inch in from the bottom. Now at the top I could just sew it regular. Now what helps me on the Altair is the Altair has an LED guide light, and it also has automatic reinforcement. So let me show you how those work on the machine. So on the screen of the machine you can see that I have my regular stitching line. I'm going to turn it off so that you can see the guide light. There's my regular stitching line, and of course I can place that wherever I want, right? And I can bring up my guide light, and my guide light I can move as well. What's really nice about the Altair is what you see is what you get. So if I wanted this to be a 1/2 inch, I can see that, oh, maybe I needed a little bit more that way, and maybe I need to move my stitch a little bit more that way. And I can literally measure the seam width on the screen of the machine. And it's going to show me that rockin' light that I can use as a guide. So there's my rockin' light right there, and I'm going to use it as a guide along my raw edge. And I know I need to stop sewing at that little dot. And we're going to do the automatic reinforcement when we get there. So let's start at the very end. I know that my light is going to be my guideline. It's going to be right along the raw edge. I can move it so that you can see it. I'm going to lower my presser foot, and I'm just going to stitch up into that dot. Now I reach the dot and I need to reinforce my seam, because when I do the Y seam I don't want it to pull apart. So all I do on the Altair is I just press the automatic reinforcement button and the machine's going to stitch in place. So now I know that that seam is reinforced. So now when I get ready to do my bottom piece, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch up to this dot, and I'm not going to stitch the seam allowance. Let me show you basically what that looks like. Use my scissors. So I'm going to put my piece right up here, and I sometimes use a pin just to make sure I've hit the right spot. So let me take a pin. I'm going to put it through the spot where I need to match, and I'm going to find the spot on the top right where I need to match as well. So when I sew, I'm going to start exactly right there. So I'm going to put that in, line everything up, kind of wiggle it, swoop my pin, and what I need to do is start sewing there. Well, at the other side, the other end, I need to do that too, right? So here we go. We're going to take our pin, put it in, find that spot on the top, oops, stick my pin in, and match that spot. Now this allows this lining at the corners not to get all bunchy. If I was to sew and go through all of the seam allowance, when I try to put the lining in and the corners, they're going to get kind of bunchy, and I don't want that. So this way I have a perfect Y seam at the bottom, and it's going to lay nice and flat inside of my little lining of my bin. So let's get started. So basically I'm going to line everything up, I'm going to lower my presser foot, and I'm going to find that circle right in the foot. And I don't know if you can see it, but the needle's going to come down right in that little dot that I made, and I put the pin to match. I'm going to take the pin out. I'm going to do my automatic reinforcement because I know I'm in the right spot, and using my guide light I'm going to sew to this other spot right here. When I get there, you guessed it, I just touch my automatic reinforcement again, and voila. Now, in regular sewing, you might think you're going to be able to do is pull this around here, but you really can't. You really need to start the process all over again. So I'm going to use my scissors, bring it up, and let's see what I did. I stopped right there, and right there. There are the three pieces that I joined, and let me see if I can simulate it so that you can see. What's going to happen is that corner is going to be beautifully flat when I put my lining inside of my bin. Now, one more, and then I'm just going to show you how fun it is to do the embroidery on this bin. So, I already have this one end. Let's come to the other. See, it's not fussy sewing, it's just you have to make sure that you don't go into that seam allowance. A lot of times these are used dead on. Look at that. It really helps when the machine helps you do that perfect half-inch seam. When you're doing like hexagons, sometimes they'll have like the three seams that come together. So this is a great trick to know how to do if you ever want to do some of those fancier quilts also. Let me lower my foot, get right inside there. What do I do next? You know, that's right, press my reinforcement key.
Tiffany.
And then stitch all the way to the other side. You know, I can even set up my machine so that when I finish reinforcing, it automatically cuts the thread for me. Just saying. So here we go. Here's the inside. Let's see if you can see it. It's kind of starting to take shape. There's the inside of my lining of my tote, and that corner is absolutely perfect, and it's going to lie nice and flat inside my lining. So that's pretty simple sewing. When I get my outside done, I'm just going to sew around that top, but I really need to do the embroidery on my outside pieces, right? So now, on the Baby Lock Altair, I can create my own embroidery with IQ Designer. But most importantly, what I can create is something called a decorative fill. And we've played with those in Sewing Tech Talk in the past. This is just one of the decorative fills. I think there's 10 included with the machine. Look how pretty that is. Now, this is not custom fabric that I bought. You create the fabric specifically for exactly what you want. So any background, any kind of thread that you want, you create your own custom design. So let's create that in the machine. What I did is, of course, remember I made my pattern, and in the embroidery, and I already did a couple so that I can show you, what I did is I made a box that my pattern will fit in. Let me show you what that looks like. Where's the outside? Here's the exterior. So I made it so that it fits right inside of that box that I made. Now, could I get fancy? Could I get fancy and made this sloping edge out there? Well, sure I could, but why? It's super simple to make a box or a rectangle that works, and I'm going to cut it out with my pattern piece anyway. Now, another thing that's kind of fun on the Altair is you can design in embroidery even if the embroidery unit isn't on. Of course, I have to put the embroidery unit on to embroider. But if you just want to check something out, if you want to see, oh, which cool embroidery design am I going to put on my little bin, or create something for a little bit later, you can do that even if the embroidery unit isn't on. So let's go to embroidery and I'll show you basically what I did. So I'm going to go home in IQ Designer. Now, I need to know how big a box I need for my pattern piece. So when I measure it, I can see that, from the seam down to the bottom, well, that's about 7.25 inches. Now, how wide do I need it to be? I need it to be at least, oh, I'd say 11.25 inches. Now, what if you're doing a bigger bin? What if you're doing a bin that's a little bit on the bigger side? Can you do that and use this feature? Well, sure. This is a fun one I did. I did this, and this is, I bet you can't guess what this is. That's right, it's an oatmeal box. You can cover anything and make it elegant. And look, I did 3 different rows of different colors of one of the really pretty fills that's also built into the Altair. So even if your design is bigger than your hoop is, no worries. You can just make multiple layers and put it in there, or you can make 3 different fabrics. Creativity, basically unlimited. So now, I know I need to make a box that big. So in IQ Designer, let me show you how simple that is. In IQ Designer, I'm going to come to the shapes, and I'm just going to pick up just a box. Okay, and there it is. Now I need to make it the size that I need it to be. So when I go into size, right now it's 6.19 by 6.19. Well, we know we need it pretty long. So let's keep going and going and going and going. Oops, I went a little bit long. I think 11.25. I think I need a little bit smaller than that. So you make that the size that you need it to be, or bigger, that's okay. Now the height of my little locker bin thing here, I decided on 7.5. So let's take it and make it 7.5. Thereabouts. Whoops. I keep going too far today. Story of my life. So now, there's the size box I need to fill with embroidery so that when I cut out my pattern, I have that beautiful fill in the whole thing. Let me show you how simple that is. So I'm going to say, okay. Now, I come into this little piece of area right here, and I touch that, and it shows me all the different fun fills that I can put into my little box. So I think I used this very first one. Yep, that's the one I used. And I'm going to stitch it in green, but it doesn't matter. You're going to stitch it in the color that you want. Okay, so now, this is as tricky as it is. I'm going to touch the bucket, touch inside the box, and it puts that fill right inside there. If I wasn't talking, that'd probably be about 30 seconds flat. So now let's take a look at it. When I go next, I can see that I have my fill inside there, and oh my goodness, I have a zigzag around the edge. I don't want that. I forgot to take it off. No problem. I can go return, come up here and say, I don't want sewing around the outside. So you can go back and forth if you forget something or you want to add something. And so I'm going to touch the bucket, touch that outside edge, go next, and I think that's pretty good. Maybe let's make it a little bit bigger. Oh, about 150%. You can go up to 200% and down to 50%. Now remember, this adds the stability to that fabric. So when you put it on your bin, it looks great. So I'm going to hit set. And let's see, I think I'm good. Oh, before I forget, let's put it into the memory of the machine in case we want to change it a little bit later on. So now, I saved that. Let's create an embroidery. Preview. And then there's my embroidery. Set. Okay, and now it's in the land of embroidery. And I can treat it just like any other embroidery that I have maybe created or purchased or whatever. Now, what I need to do is I need to stitch it on my fabric, and I've already hooped it up. This is the big hoop that comes with the Altair. It's 9.5 by 14 inches, so I can get quite a big embroidery in there. So now I need to convert the machine over to embroidery, and I don't know if you've noticed, but I used a really pretty variegated thread because I think it shows out really pretty. So I'm going to switch the machine over, stitch my little section, we'll cut it out, and we'll finish out our little box. So change over to embroidery. I'll see you in just a little bit. So I finished embroidering, and it took only just a few minutes. And basically what you do after that, it's pretty simple. After you do that, I did 2 of them on the same piece of fabric. It really only takes very little fabric. You cut out your pieces using your pattern that you drew. Remember, this outside's a little bit bigger, the inside's a little bit smaller. I have a handout for this in all my videos, so it takes you through that process. Now, I did finish embroidering this one, but I think I want to personalize it and make it for like a gift. And these make great gifts. They're not that expensive. For the inside bin, you go to the very inexpensive store, only a little bit of fabric. And wouldn't it make a great like Secret Santa gift, or fill it up with spa essentials and make it a great part of the gift that it's the gift basket. This is a built-in font. I did a knitting box for a friend for the holiday gift, and so you can personalize it. Now I have it all in the hoop right now, but one thing that's great about the Altair also is I can sew with the embroidery unit on. So I'm going to put this in the memory so I can come back to it. And I'm not going to stitch it again, but I am going to personalize it, put a name or a fun saying on the inside of it. So let's throw that into the memory of the machine. Take off the hoop. I'm not going to unhoop it, like I said, because I'm going to personalize it. But let's just switch over to sewing real fast, and I can show you the sewing of the side. So I'm going to say go to sewing. Okay. And when I go to sewing, the machine is going to push the embroidery arm all the way over to the left. And all I have to do now is switch over my foot and put in my sewing thread, and I'm ready to go. Like I said, this would make a really fun gift box or container, and even just the gift itself. I know when I was in the Quilt Guild, I had to do Secret Santa gifts, and I always racked my brain. What was I going to give? Well, this is kind of a fun gift for that. And you can fill it with other stuff too. So you take off your embroidery foot, switch it on over, put your regular foot on, put in your regular sewing thread. The machine threads itself, so that's pretty simple. Here's my regular sewing thread and bobbin. Super simple to thread. Both the top and the bobbin. Using embroidery bobbin thread, of course, for doing my embroidery, and just all-purpose thread for this is great. Now on the outside of this fabric that I did use some batting, and that is optional. I thought it would really help this kind of puff up just a little bit. So let's bring up our guide light once again. So there's our guide light. And now you can put these stitches into memory as well. So if you're going back and forth between sewing and embroidery for any particular project, what you can do is you can put all of the different settings into the memory of the machine. So it's super simple and easy. You don't have to memorize exactly what you did. So I have my guide light, I have my pin, I have everything in there. Let's lower the boom. Use that guide light to help me get my quarter and my half-inch seam. Here we go. And when I get to the bottom, I do angle out just a little bit because this is an angled container. So There we go. Now the guide light helps me position everything, of course. Scissors. Now on this outside edge, there is no reason to do that Y seam. On the inside, remember, this is basically what it looks like. You bring everything in and you're going to get, let me show you the back of it, which is probably easiest to see. You have these two coming together and you have that bottom. And it is going to lay nice and flat when I do my lining on the inside. Like I said, I think I'm going to personalize this one, so I'm not quite finished. Go to the handout and I'll put some pictures in so that you can see how fun it turns out. And these make great gifts. They're easy to do, pretty inexpensive, use leftover stuff, and it takes something plain and makes it elegant. And isn't that what your machine's for? I'm Cathy. This is Sewing Tech Talk. Thank you for joining me today. And I think the Baby Lock Altair can make anything special. Thanks. I'm going to send it off to George.
Thanks, Cathy. As usual, that was an incredible presentation. The Baby Lock Altair is dollar for dollar the most advanced machine in the industry. It has a large 9.5 by 14-inch embroidery area, plus 494 built-in beautiful designs, 30 of the most amazing fonts that you can arc and ray and edit, plus many large, beautiful monograms. You have the ability to create a design without a computer. With the IQ Designer, you can take an image from a phone, send it to the machine, and it turns into beautiful embroidery instantly. You also have an automatic applique creator to create great borders around names and other embroidery designs. Plus, of course, we love our never miss needle threader, and it also cuts all the jump stitches that you want. Now, it's not just for embroidery. This is an incredible machine with 11.25-inch opening. It also has a automatic fabric sensor. This fabric sensor senses heavy fabric like denim and sews automatically from there. It will also sew on lighter fabric like tricot. It will sew elastic. It's incredible. Now, for the real difficult fabric and for quilting, it has a digital dual feed with a belt system that controls all fabrics perfectly. It also has a laser guide, so you can guide for that perfect seam allowance. It's incredible. As I mentioned, this is dollar for dollar the most advanced machine in the industry. We have a special package right now. The total package value is $14,999, but we have it on sale for $8,999. We're offering free shipping across the country, as well as we have interest-free payments of under $188 a month. But that's not all. We have a special bonus for a limited time, and while supplies last, we're including 63 spools of beautiful embroidery thread, 2 separate design collections by Anita Good Design, which has over 600 design files in all different styles. We're including stabilizer, all kinds of needles, bobbins, and a membership to Love of Knowledge. We're here, you're going to see all kinds of demonstrations and techniques on the Baby Lock Altair and other sewing techniques. This is for a limited time, but I also mentioned we have interest-free payments. Now, for those who don't want to finance, we have even a better bonus. So give us a call at 1-800-865-9664 or click on the link to order today. Bye for now.